It's September, which means it's time for one of my favorite things. And as someone with autism spectrum disorder, I don't have a lot of things that I would classify as my favorite. But this one's one of them. It's Serial Killer September. It's Our Weird World.
Our Weird World.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and I should probably unpack that intro a little bit. It's been a while since I've addressed it, but back in early June, so about 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and I kind of talked about it there for a little bit, but at least here, I haven't really brought it up that much. And so if you're a relatively new listener, hi, welcome to the show. But yes, I have what is classified as autism spectrum disorder. And generally what that means is I have a hard time navigating the social constructs that society has built up and has deemed to be normal, appropriate behavior. So I struggle a lot with, one-on-one or small group conversations. I get very overwhelmed in, unfamiliar places, in large crowds. I meticulously plan out everything. Case in point, I have episodes for this podcast planned out through 2025 and part of 26 at this point. It's what I do. I plan it because I like to feel in control of something, because I know that subconsciously once I go out in public, I am not in control of anything. So just a little refresher there. Your boy got a touch of the tism, and that's, that just helps me help you understand why I am the way that I am. To put it into terms and concepts that you are familiar with. And so it's great. Life is great. And so we're starting, as I segue masterfully into today's topic. We're starting Serial Killer September with a little sampler. All right. Little 3 stories of some serial killers from history to really get the ball rolling on this 3rd annual. It is a tradition, unlike any other. If you like golf, you understand that little quote there. But yeah, we're looking at 3 stories today. Stories of Amelia Dyer, Henry Lee Lucas, and Arthur Shawcross. Last one is going to get pretty crazy. So buckle up. It's story time. Amelia Dyer was born in the village of Pile Marsh near Bristol on kind of the southwestern side of the British island. Dyer's childhood wasn't great. I'm sure you're not surprised by that. She was forced to take care of her ailing mother, who was driven insane by typhus before she died in 1848. And she also had 2 younger sisters who died prior to that. So just a lot of death going on in her family pretty early on. And by the time she was 24, thanks to almost everyone in her immediate family dying, Dyer was estranged from the rest of her family when she married a 59-year-old man. So, that's a 35-year age difference. The couple started the marriage off on the right foot by both lying about their ages on the marriage certificate to reduce the age gap, because they both knew it was kind of weird. And then after the marriage, Dyer began training to be a nurse. But nursing sucks. I don't know of anyone who is a nurse who has ever been like, yes, I love my job. I love the hours. I love dealing with patients. I love every aspect of it. No, I've never heard that ever. All right. But thank God for you nurses. You're doing the Lord's work. And so Amelia Dyer, she hated being a nurse. And after talking with a midwife, Dyer learned that she could just open up her home to women who had taken, a few too many adult nap times, if you know what I'm saying, and illegitimately birthed a child. And rather than carry the shame of being known as the town whore, those babies would then be given up for adoption. And this process was actually pretty common in England at the time. It was called baby farming, where an individual, in this case, Amelia Dyer, would bring these women into their home. She would then take the babies from the mothers for a flat or a low monthly fee to ensure their care, as those babies were then adopted out to people who actually wanted them. Dyer immediately saw all of the financial potential for this new venture and took in as many expecting mothers as she could. She even advertised that she was willing to nurse and raise the babies as her own in return for a very hefty fee and clothing for the child. So, basically, it's like, hey, all right, you made a mistake. We've all been there. Bring me your baby. All right. I will even breastfeed it. All right. I don't know how my body's doing it, but it's doing it. All right. That's wild. And also, you're going to need to give me a lot of money and also a full wardrobe for this kid. But then it's not your problem anymore. So, how much does peace of mind worth to you? Huh? So anyway, of course, here's the thing though, you're a smart person. You realize oh, okay, we're in serial killer September, so maybe something's up here. The downside here of baby farming in general was that the farmers, so to speak, often neglected the babies and just kind of let them die. They didn't even bother adopting them out. They just took the babies and the money and really cared more about the money. Dyer ended up either divorcing or her husband just died. I don't remember, but she ended up getting remarried and having her own kids, and decided that it was too expensive to keep really any baby alive for any given amount of time. And she's probably not wrong. It's probably really expensive to keep a baby alive. You got a bunch of doctor's appointments. You got a bunch of diapers. You got a bunch of food and formula, and you got to change their wardrobe every 3 months because they don't stop growing. It's a big price tag to have a baby. And Amelia Dyer, she's not into it. All right. She decides pretty early on it's not for her. So instead, as soon as she received, a new bushel of crotch fruit or whatever, she would then take them into the other room and just kill them on the spot. Trigger warning. A little late on that. But whatever, you get it. Dyer actually was arrested in 1879 after a doctor became suspicious of all of the babies that had died in her care. But instead of being convicted of murder, Dyer was just charged with neglect and sentenced to 6 months of hard labor. Now, despite that, doing hard labor for 6 months nearly drove her insane. And, everyone just kind of keeping tabs on her, making sure that she served this sentence, thought that this entire ordeal would scare her into being a good person. So once she completed her sentence, she tried returning to work as a nurse, but by now she was an alcoholic and addicted to opioids. So probably didn't work out the way that people were hoping. She even tried to kill herself by drinking 2 bottles of laudanum, which was an old-timey painkiller, but she had actually built up such a tolerance to it that it didn't do anything to her. So that's bad. That's bad to be so addicted to opioids or a certain type of drug that you then try to overdose on said drug that you're addicted to, and your body's just yeah, man, I thought we were just really trying to party. Thought it was just time to go extreme one night. We're back. We're good. Everything's fine. So nursing obviously didn't end up working out. And so Dyer returned to baby farming. This time, instead of bringing in a doctor, an actual doctor to issue a birth certificate before each death, which is what had gotten her in trouble in the first place, Dyer just decided to dispose of the bodies herself. And still, Dyer ended up raising suspicions of police and parents who ultimately had a change of heart and tried to reclaim their children. Ugh, that's awkward. It's just hey, Amelia, We were thinking, and we would like to have our baby back. Can we just kind of get him back, if you don't mind? Yeah, about that. I don't seem to know where your baby is. I don't know what accent that is. I think it was British. I don't know. For the next few years, Dyer and her real family just bounced from town to town using different aliases to avoid police, but were still just opening up these baby farms. On March 30th, 1896, a bargeman retrieved a package that he saw floating down the River Thames. When he opened the box, he was delighted to find that it was full of scones. Like, what are the odds that such a random detail would make that into the story? Just a lowly bargeman finding a random box of scones floating down the river. No, of course that's not what was in the box. It was a dead baby in the box. Come on. Maybe there were scones in the box with the dead baby. I don't know. If that's what helps you process this a little bit better, go for it. The bargeman immediately took the box to the police in Reading, who opened an investigation. After searching the body and the box, Constable Anderson found a label from the Temple Meads station in Bristol, as well as a faintly legible name on the package where it was addressed to a Mrs. Thomas. All of that evidence somehow, because there's a lot of details that got lost, all of that evidence led police to Dyer, who was then placed under surveillance. And after watching at least 20 mothers arrive and drop off their unwanted children, police finally arrested Dyer on April 4th and charged her with murder. By the time police had figured everything out, the rest of the investigation team had been dredging the river and had recovered 6 more bodies. On May 22nd, Dyer pled guilty to 1 murder on top of pleading insanity, citing several stays at mental institutions in several towns, probably just to treat her drug addiction. Despite that, it took the jury less than 5 minutes to find her guilty, which is just a refreshingly short amount of time for a jury to decide things. Like, I hate when juries go and deliberate for hours on stuff that's like so obvious. Like, you saw the video of the dude killing the person. What is there to deliberate? Like, you saw it. It was like you were there when he did it. Just go ahead and, charge him being guilty or convict him of being guilty. After spending the next 3 weeks filling exercise books with all of her confessions, Dyer was hanged on June 10th, 1896. Can't remember if there was like a full final number of all of the people that she was expected of killing. Oh yeah, of course. So over the course, and this would make her one of the most prolific serial killers of all time, estimated somewhere between 200 and 400 babies killed. Definitely 6 confirmed, but could have been anywhere from 200 to 400, which, if true, that's insane. That's a big number. One last note here on Amelia Dyer. Since she was operating at the same time, some historians actually suspected Dyer of being Jack the Ripper, since that murderer had killed prostitutes with botched abortions. However, there was never any like actual evidence to suggest Dyer was Jack the Ripper, and I think they, like, in the last couple of years, confirmed who Jack the Ripper actually was. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but it wasn't Amelia Dyer is the point of that. Our next story here is of Henry Lee Lucas, who was born on August 23rd, 1936 in Blacksburg, Virginia. His mother was a prostitute who then forced Henry to cross-dress in public and watch her have sex with her clients, which that's a level of weird that I can't even begin to comprehend. Like, because she did it, like, both things simultaneously, and you had to know that there was at least one moment where she is working with a client, right? She's banging her client, and the client looks over and sees what he thinks is a little girl watching, and normal people would be a little turned off by that. But there was a guy who was just like, hey, should we let your daughter join in? Even though the daughter's probably like 6 or 8 at the time. And then I just love how the mother would have responded in this situation. Just be like, oh no, that's my son. So no, for multiple reasons. I don't know. That's a weird image that you probably didn't want in your head today. When he was 10 years old, Henry lost an eye after it became infected following a fight. And then by the time he reached 6th grade, he decided to drop out of school and run away from home. He just kind of became a drifter, kind of going from town to town around Virginia before he ultimately got thrown into prison on over a dozen burglary charges. When he got out of prison in 1960, he moved to Tecumseh, Michigan to live with his half-sister, Opal. And at the time, Henry was actually preparing to marry a pen pal that he had corresponded with while in prison in Virginia. But when Henry's mother visited the family up in Michigan for Christmas, she found out about it and disapproved of this relationship as if she had some sort of moral high ground to stand on. And she insisted that Henry move back with her to Blacksburg. So, like any good son would do, Henry grabbed a knife and stabbed her in the neck after she attacked him with a broomstick. Of course. Although he claimed self-defense, Henry was sentenced to 20 years in prison for second-degree murder because he ended up killing her, which, I mean, I don't know, maybe you kind of assume that after I said he stabbed her in the neck. But thanks to America's fantastic prison system, Henry was released in 1970 after just 10 years due to overcrowding. And like, here's the thing. I get that we need laws, but at what point do we look at the problem of prison overcrowding and maybe think to ourselves, hey, maybe we have too many strict laws and maybe we should tone it down a bit, right? Because, like, you know, America, land of the free, but we have a prison overcrowding problem. I don't know. Just seems to be some inconsistencies there. After a year after his release in 1971, Henry was then convicted of attempting to kidnap 3 schoolgirls and was given another 5-year prison sentence. After he served that, he kind of bounced around the South from job to job before he met a man named Otis Toole at a soup kitchen in Jacksonville. Now, Otis, he was considered mentally retarded, which was the terminology at the time. Also, I have autism spectrum disorder. I think I get a pass for that. I'm kidding. I don't, but that was the clinical term that's the language that they used, man. Get off my dick. And Otis, I don't know why I get so defensive. He suffered from seizures caused by epilepsy. Otis's favorite thing to do, however, was play with fire. So, you know, that shouldn't be surprising. So much so that he would get preposterously aroused anytime he started a fire, which that's weird how the brain works, right? It's just like, ooh, fire, boner. Why? While living with Otis and his parents in Jacksonville, Henry then befriended his niece, Becky Powell, who also suffered from a, quote, mild intellectual impairment, which is just coincidentally what professionals call it when you fall in love with a career criminal and serial killer, which is exactly what Becky did. But for the next decade, though, everything kind of seemed okay. When Otis's parents passed away in 1982, Becky was placed in a state shelter, and Henry convinced her to leave the shelter and just join him on the road. The happy couple drove all the way out to Texas, where they both found jobs working for Kate Rich, who was an elderly lady in need of just constant care. They just, you know, she needed someone. They were there. They were happy to do whatever they needed. And it was fine. However, they were quickly fired after forging checks and not actually taking care of her like they were supposed to do. So without any job, no money, they started hitchhiking and were quickly picked up by the minister of the House of Prayer, which was this religious cult in Stoneburg, a small community on the Oklahoma-Texas border. Now, Becky, who was 15 at the time, which means that she was very young when her and Henry started hooking up. Gross. She was 15 at the time. She had turned into this really difficult hormonal teenager and just drove Henry crazy with just how just obstinate and annoying and stubborn she was. Becky eventually made her way to a truck stop and tried to leave Henry behind, but instead he ended up killing her. Now, a few months later, Henry was arrested on an unlawful possession of a firearm, and according to Henry, the police then stripped him naked, held him in a cell, and refused him contact with an attorney, which, I mean, that sounds like standard procedure in a Texas prison system, so I'm not really surprised by that. After 4 days, Henry began confessing to dozens of murders, including that of Kate Rich and Becky Powell, along with a bunch of other murders that he probably didn't have anything to do with. He led police to the remains of both Kate's and Becky's bodies, so he for sure did those. And then a few months later, Henry was transferred to another prison where he pretty much decided to confess to practically every murder ever committed. Even stuff that had already been solved, had already been definitely attributed to other people. But there were a lot of cold cases. And the Texas Rangers, who didn't feel like working on a lot of that stuff anyway, ended up clearing over 200 unsolved murder cases and attributed them to Henry, because why would anyone lie about murdering someone, especially to a Texas cop, and especially if they were severely mentally handicapped? Who knows? Henry was officially convicted of 11 murders and sentenced to death for one, that of an unidentified woman named Orange Socks, who disappeared on Halloween in 1979. So he wasn't even sentenced to death for the 2 murders that we are for sure he committed. Even though the jury was presented evidence of a timesheet where Henry was working in Jacksonville, Florida at the time of this Orange Socks disappearance, clearly a verbal confession by a crazy person is more valuable than hard evidence in Texas. Henry was eventually found dead in his prison cell in 2001. And yeah, I mean, just despite confessing to 200 different murders, most people today believe he did not actually do that, but he is considered in serial killer land a very prolific murderer. Our final story here is of Arthur Shawcross, and this is going to get even wilder than the Amelia Dyer story. He was the first of 4 children born to Arthur and Elizabeth Shawcross in Kittery, Maine on June 6, 1945. Now, records of Arthur's childhood are a little confusing because on one hand, there are reports that said he performed well in schools and he had several IQ tests performed where he averaged a score of 106, which is, it's a little above average, I think. But on the other hand, however, there are reports that Arthur's mother took a less than traditional parenting approach by shoving several items in Arthur's butt and also just kind of slurping on his gherkin a little bit, which, yeah, duh. What? Whose mom hasn't done that? Not mine. But yours probably, right? Probably. He was also a consistent bedwetter and then claimed to have sex with his own sister when he was a junior in high school. In 1967, Arthur was drafted into the Army, ended up divorcing his first wife and gave up parental rights to their 18-month-old son. Never saw him again. And then after serving a tour in Vietnam without seeing any sort of action, Arthur was sent to Fort Sill in Oklahoma, where he married for the second time and developed an unhealthy enthusiasm for setting things on fire. So here we go again. Once he was discharged from the Army, Arthur then moved to New York, much to the disappointment of his second wife, who then divorced him soon after. Arthur did not adjust well to the second divorce, and so he started setting bigger things on fire. His little pyromania, started I'll just set this dead squirrel on fire or something. I don't know. But now he's setting whole buildings on fire. That was tasty. He was eventually arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for arson, but he was set free after nearly 2 years for saving a prison guard during a riot. After his release, things started to look up for Arthur. He found a job in the Watertown, New York Public Works Department, and he got married again. But then that's kind of where all the good times stopped. On May 7th, 1972, Arthur lured 10-year-old Jack Blake into the woods and then raped and murdered him for who knows why. 4 months later, he raped and killed an 18-year-old girl. Now, he was arrested 6 months later based on evidence and openly admitted to both murders. He's like, yeah, I definitely raped and killed those kids. For sure. 100%. Not going to deny it. And as part of his plea deal for taking authorities to Blake's body, he was given a 25-year prison sentence. Now, that should pretty much be the end of the story, right? Like, sure, 25-year prison sentence, kind of lenient, but also long enough that, like, he's going to get forgotten and he's just going to come out. He's just going to maybe be homeless. Maybe he even just dies in prison. Who knows? But after serving 12 years, and despite the recommendations from several psychiatrists who obviously just aren't real people, several recommendations that he actually be put in prison forever, or at least sent to a mental institution forever, Arthur was released on parole. He and his new girlfriend, Rose Wally, tried to start a new life together, but they ended up bouncing around several New York towns and were usually, after a couple of weeks, forced to move because the residents were not okay at all with the arrival of a convicted child murderer in their neighborhood. And good for them. I wouldn't want one either. Not exactly going to drive up property values when you have a convicted child murderer living in your cul-de-sac. Eventually, Arthur's parole officer sneaked him into a Rochester, New York neighborhood by purposely failing to notify city authorities of his arrival. So it's like they have this whole process where it's like, all right, we're going to send you to this town. I've just got to let the city authorities know. We're going to get you a neighborhood here. You just need to acclimate, get a job, do all of that. And after getting kicked out of several towns, they're just like, hey, wait a minute. I see what the problem is. We keep telling people that he's coming, which gives them an opportunity to form an opinion. Let's just skip that step and just put him somewhere, and maybe no one will notice. Maybe no one will notice because it's not like he's going to kill any more people, right? No, there's no way he does that. Well, beginning in March of 1988, Arthur spent the next year and a half murdering women, primarily prostitutes, along the Genesee River in the Rochester area, which, by the way, really pretty area. Rochester, kind of a dumpy city, but it's also kind of charming in its own way. There's a big waterfall right in the middle of downtown, like almost a 100-foot tall waterfall right in the middle of downtown. There's a brewery kind of on the riverbank. You can go grab a beer, just see the waterfall. It's really great. All right. The entire Genesee Valley from like Letchworth State Park down, they call it the Grand Canyon of the East. It's massive, gorgeous, huge waterfalls. Love that area. This is where this guy was murdering prostitutes. He killed a dozen people and here we go. He would slice off and eat their vulvas, which is like a random body part. It's like, what are you, like, are you just so out of your mind that you kill this prostitute and then just immediately think, God, you know what I could go for right now? An Arby's roast beef sandwich. I don't have any bread, but what? Look at my luck. Sliced roast beef right here. Quip, snip, snip, nom, 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 nom. Right? How? Why? Out of all of the things, and we've covered some cannibals here on the show, and like, I can see how maybe, you get a nice butt steak, good muscle there, good thigh muscle, calf, chest, good pec, ribs. But no, he goes for the vulva, which isn't even meat. It's just skin, I think. I don't know. I didn't take anatomy. I don't know what's made of. I don't know what that stuff is made of. I barely know how it works. I don't know what it's made of. It's like a hot dog. I know what it is. I don't know what it's made of. I know it tastes good. Anyway. All right. Anyway, where are we at? He killed a dozen people, and he did this. He did the whole thing I just did. He was finally caught on January 5th, 1990. His trial began in November with Arthur pleading not guilty by reason of insanity and by saying he was afflicted with PTSD because of all of the atrocities he had experienced in Vietnam, which included decapitating Vietnamese women and impaling their heads on poles. However, FBI profiler Robert Ressler, who I think actually coined the term serial killer, reviewed those claims that he made and found that they were, quote, patently outrageous and untrue. Because, I mean, that's real easy to back up. You just look at his military records and you see that he was not involved in any conflict while deployed at Vietnam. He wasn't even close. So there's no way he could have experienced that. He's just making it up. He is a sociopathic liar. Except for that part about the vulvas. He definitely did that because there's documented proof of that. Arthur was sentenced to life in prison, where he eventually died of cardiac arrest on November 10th, 2008. All right. First episode of our third annual Serial Killer September in the books. And yeah, I don't know. Let's just wrap it up and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, baby farms. A thing, apparently. Just have a baby you don't want, take it to the baby farm. And just, don't have a change of heart because... yeah, that's not a guarantee, man, I wonder if that's how that song started, just people dropping their kids off at a baby farm. And then a couple days later, I want my baby back. Oh, God, that's the stupidest thing I've ever thought of. Number 2, Henry Lee Lucas confessed to every murder ever committed. He probably didn't commit all of them, but he was attributed to over 200 cold cases in Texas alone, which is pretty difficult considering he didn't spend that much time in Texas in the grand scheme of things. But whatever, like Texas is going to really do their due diligence on something. And number 3, Arthur Shawcross. He killed some prostitutes and then he ate some vulvas. Next week on Our Weird World, Serial Killer September continues with the story of Robert Hansen. And that joke will make a whole lot of sense next week because I'm going to beat that dead horse for sure. But yeah, no, Robert Hansen, an Alaskan serial killer, known as the Butcher Baker, which I think that's a stupid nickname. I don't really get it. He basically, he owned a bakery, but then he killed people. The nicknames that, police ended up coming up with these people are kind of weak sometimes. Not every serial killer needs to have a nickname. I just don't think it's necessary. But whatever. We'll get into all that next week. But that's going to do it this week. Thanks for listening. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.